Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Nosum and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 51, which is headlined by a rematch that I don't think many people thought would be a headlining rematch a number of years ago. We get Vicente Luque versus Belal Muhammad 2, a well-deserved headlining rematch also. Just before we get into the breakdowns, as always, we're going to be recapping the Baeza AI UFC prediction software from last weekend at UFC 273. It had another good event with one little gem and an expanded gem in there as well. As always, that's going to be posted as a separate video to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/MMA Play 365. So make sure you check that out. And we go straight into the breakdowns, into the main event. Like I said, it's a rematch from 6 years ago. Back in 2016, we've got Vicente Luque versus Belal Muhammad 2. And this is a perfect rematch. Vicente Luque and Belal Muhammad have both become top contenders in the division. Like I said, since that first fight where they were both relatively unknown in that first fight, they've both come a very long way. It's not going to end up like, well, at least I don't think it's going to end up like that last fight anyway, with Luque just deading Belal Muhammad. I definitely think that we're going to see this fight play out, you know, for a number of rounds, if not go the distance, go all the way. Both fighters have changed the styles in regards to developments and improvements. So again, it's going to be a completely different fight to what it was back in 2016. So I don't really put too much stock into that first fight. But I do think that from a betting line perspective, Vicente Luque is a moderate favourite at around -160 at the time of recording this podcast. I do think that the bookies have got that line right. I think that Vicente Luque's got a really dangerous striking game still. I think his low kicks have come a long way. Really dangerous low kicks. Obviously, is going to be fighting Belal Muhammad, who fights out of an orthodox stance, so that lead leg is going to be available to be kicked. Vicente Luque's still got power in both hands. That check left hook's really good. The lead check left hook, and then obviously he's got power in his right hand as well. Where Belal Muhammad, in my opinion, is going to have advantages in this fight is in the wrestling, and we saw that in the Stephen Wonderboy Thompson fight. You know, the wrestling from Belal Muhammad just looks so much improved, and also Muhammad looked like he was bigger physically as well, in better shape, stronger. So the strength and conditioning has obviously been there for Belal Muhammad. Then you couple that with the wrestling developments, and you know, it ties together really well. So I think from an offensive wrestling perspective, Belal Muhammad, that's where he's going to be better than Vicente Luque as a mixed martial artist. But that comes with problems with Vicente Luque. And what I mean by that is, if you go back and watch that Stephen Wonderboy Thompson fight, Belal Muhammad was shooting takedowns and he was pushing Stephen Wonderboy Thompson back to the cage and then chaining takedowns off the cage as well. But what Muhammad was doing, and this is very noticeable, is he was leaving his neck available to be taken. Obviously, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson's not a grappler, not a jiu-jitsu specialist, but one thing that Vicente Luque does have is a very nasty Darson anaconda choke. Chokes from the front neck chokes, and once he has that locked, he normally completes it, whether he submits his opponent or sends him to sleep. Now, this is going to be a real problem for Belal Muhammad if he starts coming in wrestling like he did against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, because his neck is going to be available to be snatched, and Vicente Luque will absolutely snatch a neck if it's given to him. So I think from a striking perspective, Belal Muhammad's more of a point-scoring striker, and if this was a bigger cage, then, you know, I'd give him more of a chance here for sure. But the smaller cage, Vicente Luque, in his slow stalking style of striking, he's not going to have to try too hard to close the distance because the cage is going to be much smaller. He's going to be able to get off on his low kicks. He's going to be able to land some hard strikes on Belal Muhammad. If there is a finishing upside, it's absolutely on Vicente Luque. If the fight does go 5 rounds, that's where it gets a little bit closer for Belal Muhammad, because I do believe he's got the better cardio, and I do believe he'll have better efficiency with the volume and the striking over 5 rounds of what Luque will. But Luque could still massively hurt Belal Muhammad, you know, and then when it goes into those later rounds, he can still be there as well. So, like I said, I think Vicente Luque's got a lot going for him here. I think he's got the power. I think he's got the ability to chop at his opponent as well, break them down methodically. And I also think where Belal Muhammad's going to be a better mixed martial artist is in the wheelhouse of Luque with those front chokes, the Darce chokes, the anaconda chokes. So I think stylistically it's a good fight for Vicente Luque. I'm picking Vicente Luque to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, I'm happy and I'm sad about this fight. We've got Caio versus Gadzhi, Omargadzhiev. And the reason I'm happy about this is because it's getting a co-main event slot. Both fighters making the UFC debut and both fighters in the co-main event. I'm not sure how many times that's happened previously in the UFC. But where I'm unhappy and sad about this fight is the fact that the UFC are matching these two guys together, because I believe they're two really good fighters, solid prospects, fighters that will get better, will develop. Not that they're not good now, because they both are. They're in the co-main event slot for a reason. But I just wish that the UFC had built them up on separate paths and eventually make them meet further down the line. But listen, the UFC are interested in finding out who's the better fighter right now, and it is going to be a good fight. I'm not surprised it's a co-main event. Caio is a fighter that comes out in a karate stance. He doesn't stay in the karate stance, which makes me think that that's not his natural stance. And it could also have a factor on the cardio as well, because when you're in the karate stance, you're constantly sliding in and out of range, using more movement, obviously expending more energy. So like a couple of minutes, 3 minutes maybe after the first round, you will see Borralho switch from that karate stance back into a southpaw boxing stance where he'll be more upright and less mobile. But Caio Borralho's got power in his hands. He's got a good jiu-jitsu game. He has done grappling tournaments. I believe he's grappled Jayutan Almeida, who's an absolute monster. He did lose that grappling bout with him, but Caio Borralho's got a good submission game, good ground game. He's got power in his hands. He's patient, and he doesn't mind fighting off the back foot. That can sometimes work for you. It can sometimes play against you. Obviously, last weekend we saw Julio Arce win on the back foot, but I think more often than not, the fighter that's more aggressive that's coming forward is the fighter that the judges are going to prefer. But on the flip side, we've got Gadzhi, Omargadzhiev, typical Russian. He's got decent striking, to be fair to him. You know, it's not terrible, but his striking is a means to get to the wrestling. And the wrestling's just really, really good. Again, typical of your Russian. He's got good double legs, got good single leg takedowns. He'll lift a single leg and look to trip to the mat as well. Once he's got his opponent down to the mat, he'll try and wrap up the legs with his own legs, you know, elevating his opponent's ankles off the floor so they're struggling to get back up. And then he's got a crushing, heavy topside game. And on that topside game, like I said, he's heavy on top. He gets into a position where he's comfortable, where his opponent seems to not have too many answers and not have too much of a threat in regards to sweeping and reversing. And that's where Omargadzhiev will sit. He'll land some ground and pound. He'll do just enough for the referee not to split the opponents up, stand them back up to the feet. But he does have a sneaky good submission game, and we saw that in his Dana White Contender Series fight. You know, he finished with a knee bar in round one. The only thing that I didn't like about that, he was in a really good position until he transitioned to the knee bar, which could have put himself in a bad position. If he'd not got the knee bar, his opponent could have ended up back on top. So that's the one thing I didn't like about that. But like I said, he's a typical wrestling heavy Russian fighter, 13-0, unbeaten, good heavy pressure top game. And it's going to be really interesting to see how he matches up with Caio Borralho here, because he can't leave a neck exposed. He can't leave a neck open to be taken. He can't make a mistake on the mat, because Caio Borralho will wrap something up, whether that be that guillotine or whether that be an armbar or a triangle off his back. He's got to be really careful. But what I do like about Omargadzhiev is once he gets his opponents down to the mat, he won't put himself in those positions where he's going to be at risk of getting submitted. He will look to pass the guard. He will look to land in side control or half guard from his takedowns as well. I think Caio Borralho is going to be the better striker here. I definitely think that Gadzhi, Omargadzhiev has got to be really careful he doesn't get caught with something on the feet before he gets his wrestling game going. But I think once that wrestling gets going, I do think that Caio Borralho is going to start being a bit dangerous initially. But once he gets back up to the feet, if he should get back up to his feet, or once those initial submission attempts are over, I think that Omargadzhiev is just going to be able to control the fight on the mat. I think if we get into the second round, the third round, the takedowns really start rinsing and repeating. I think the longer it goes on, I think that it's going to be harder for Caio Borralho to get back up to his feet. I think it'll mentally affect him in regards to him just knowing he's going to get taken down. He won't be able to get his striking off because of it. He does slow down in fights as well, Borralho. We have seen that. He can get pinned up against the fence, and all these are things that a 13-0 Russian with good wrestling and good heavy pressure top side is going to be able to take advantage of. So I think it's a great fight. I think both are prospects, but in this fight, matched up together, I'm picking Omargadzhiev to win this fight. And in the next fight, this one's going to be an explosive fight. We've got Fialho versus Miguel Baeza. And like I said, this fight's going to be explosive. Fialho's got power, he's aggressive, he'll come forwards, he'll look to land a ton of volume, especially in that first round. He can slow down a little bit the longer the fight goes on due to being overly aggressive and, you know, expending a lot of cardio. I do have a worry for Baeza in this fight. Baeza, we saw as a solid prospect. He was doing well. He went to war with Ponzinibbio, and I actually think that war affected him. I don't think it affected him directly after the fight, but then looking at his last fight and how he was finished from then and how he changed as a fighter. He was on the back foot, he wasn't throwing as much. And ultimately, you know, he got caught late in a fight that I do believe he was on the way to winning. But I think it's affected, I think the last 2 fights have affected his durability a little bit, for sure. You know, that war against Ponzinibbio and then that bad knockout in his last fight. And I also think from a mental perspective, it's going to be in the back of his mind as well. So I do have concerns from that perspective with Miguel Baeza. But from a skill set perspective and how good he is as a fighter, he's still a very skilled fighter. He's still got very hard low kicks. He's still got good fight IQ, like he's got good danger awareness. He'll slide in and out of range nicely. I think he's just got to weather a storm with Andre Fialho in this fight. I think he's got to make sure he doesn't get caught with anything early, be a little bit defensive, counter-strike. We saw he can counter-strike from his last fight. He did a good job of it, but he's just got to make sure that he comes into this fight confident and he's not worried about getting knocked out, because that's when ultimately you are at most risk of getting knocked out, when you're overcautious. And I think in this fight, if you fight smart in that first round, lets Andre Fialho come forward, weather a storm, counter-strike him, I think he's going to be able to smash him with low kicks. I think he's going to be able to hit him with good counters. And I also think, as always, Miguel Baeza's got an underrated ground game. So even if Baeza is a little bit cautious about striking with Fialho and worried about getting knocked out, I think he could potentially take Fialho down. And like I said, on the mat, I think he can land ground and pound. I think he can submission hunt. I think he's got a decent top game as well, and he's got good control. So overall, I do have some concerns with Baeza, with the durability, with the mental aspect of it, after coming off a war and a bad knockout as well. But he is the more skilled fighter, and that can't be ignored in this fight. I think he's going to be the better technical striker. He's got power himself. He's got the ability, like I said with Luque earlier, to chop his opponents down with low kicks, and he's got a good ground game and a much better ground game than Fialho. So for those reasons, I'm picking Miguel Baeza to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Mayra Bueno Silva versus Yanan Wu. And I think this is a really good fight for Silva, if I'm being honest. You know, she's a large, wide favourite on the betting line. I kind of get it, although it is a little bit sketchy playing these types of chalked spots, but I do think she's got a good fight ahead of her. Where Silva normally has problems is when she's fighting opponents that want to take her down to the mat, want to control her on the mat. And Silva's got good jiu-jitsu, but she does seem to get a little bit stuck at times on bottom. She prefers to have things her own way, dictate where the fight goes herself. So on the feet, striking, she's fluent, she's got a Muay Thai base, she's got good kicks, good punches, good elbows. But then if she wants to take the fight to the mat, then she's much better when things are on her terms. And I think that's what she's going to get in this fight, because Yanan Wu isn't the type of fighter that's going to want to take her down, that's going to want to be relentless. She doesn't have great statistics on the takedown offense either, so I don't think that Yanan Wu is going to be a huge threat in regards to that wrestling. And like I said, I think it's going to help Mayra Bueno Silva in this fight, because I do think she's going to be able to dictate the pace. I do think she's going to have things on her own terms. With the striking, she's got to be careful of Yanan Wu, because she is a big physical presence inside the cage and she is strong. So Silva's got to make sure she's not getting pinned up against the cage. But aside from that, I think that Silva's the slicker striker. I think she's going to have more volume. I think if there's a wrestling or grappling advantage, it likely goes to Silva as well, who is the more likely fighter to engage in those wrestling and grappling scenarios. So like I say, I don't think Yanan Wu is a bad fighter, but I just think she's going to be a step behind Mayra Bueno Silva in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Mayra Bueno Silva to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Pat Sabatini versus TJ Laramie. And I think this is a horrible fight for TJ Laramie. You know, I think he's had after this fight at least, he's going to have a very tough start in the UFC. Obviously, in his first fight, he fought Darrick Minner. That was a very winnable fight from him, in my opinion, but he got caught early on with a submission. You know, that was the only way that Darrick Minner was going to win that fight against TJ Laramie, and it caught him. I thought the UFC might give him a better fight here, but they've given him Pat Sabatini, who is a good striker, taekwondo background, and he's got a really good wrestling and grappling game himself. So where TJ Laramie is going to thrive in the UFC is when he has that wrestling advantage, that grappling advantage over his opponents, where he can just rinse and repeat takedowns. But here against Sabatini, rinsing and repeat takedowns is going to really put him in danger, because Sabatini is a very, very skilled jiu-jitsu player, and when he's on the mat, when he's topside, he very rarely makes mistakes. He can hold your opponent down. I do think this fight's going to be very tricky for both fighters initially in the first round, but I think the longer this fight goes on, I think Sabatini is going to prove to be the better striker. I think his wrestling game is going to be able to get going. I think his topside grappling is going to be better than TJ Laramie's in this spot, and with Laramie seemingly jumping into making mistakes on the mat, that does concern me as well. So from Sabatini's perspective, I think he showed in his last fight that he is a very well-rounded, solid fighter, that when he hits his game plan on point and doesn't make mistakes, he's extremely dangerous, extremely hard to beat. And I think that TJ Laramie, where he's going to win a lot of fights in the UFC, is when he can rinse and repeat those takedowns and get his opponent down routinely. I don't think that's going to be the case with Sabatini. He might be able to get Sabatini down. In fact, I'm sure if he does try and wrestle him, he will be able to take him down. But Sabatini's grappling and jiu-jitsu is good enough to create scrambles, create reversals, potentially submit TJ Laramie as well on the mat. So stylistically, I really like TJ Laramie as a fighter, but stylistically, I think this is a really tough one for him, and I think he's got a mountain to climb on Saturday night. So I'm picking Pat Sabatini to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Devin Clark versus William Knight. I don't mean any disrespect here, but I think this is a really lazy fight. Devin Clark and William Knight both fighting up at heavyweight. They've both fought down in weight before. I just think they're both sick of cutting weight. They don't want to cut weight anymore. They want to fight in the heaviest division. And we do see that from time to time. You know, we've seen it with Ilir Latifi, we've seen it Jake Collier and other fighters as well. And I just feel that with William Knight missing massive in his last fight and Devin Clark just not wanting to cut weight anymore, I do think it's a bit of a lazy fight, and they both agreed to fight at heavyweight. I think it's going to be a low volume affair. I'm going to be very interested to see how Devin Clark looks at heavyweight, because I think if this was at light heavyweight, I think that Devin Clark would absolutely be on point here, and I think he would just smash William Knight on volume at the very least. But at heavyweight, I think Clark's going to be a little bit slower. I think his volume's going to be a little bit less. But with William Knight, like I said, he can be a type of fighter that really just doesn't throw anything at all. And in his last fight, again, that was the case. He just didn't throw anything. He wasn't active. He allowed himself to get pieced up. His corner was on at him, trying to motivate him and get him to move forward and just land, just throw and land. But he just wasn't doing any of that, and he just allowed himself to ultimately just get pieced up, out-volumed, and it wasn't even a fight for him at the end of the day. So I think that's the biggest concern that I have with William Knight, the fact that he can't get himself going in fights, his corners can't get himself going, and if that one big knockout shot doesn't happen, then he's probably going to lose the fight. The thing is, in this fight, William Knight, I think, could knock Devin Clark out. Devin Clark has been finished before, and I do think that's the big concern for Devin Clark. So it's whether Devin Clark gets cracked by William Knight and knocked out, but if he doesn't, I think Devin Clark is naturally just going to land more volume and be more active. I don't trust William Knight in that respect. So I am going to side with the fighter. I normally side with the fighter that doesn't need the knockout to win the fight. I think the knockout could absolutely happen from William Knight, but like I said, if it doesn't, if Devin Clark's smart, if Devin Clark goes to his wrestling, he's got a wrestling background as well. So if he tries to wrestle William Knight, tire him out, get all the lactic acid into those muscles of William Knight and just make it frustrating for him, that's another path to victory for Clark. I think Clark could wrestle him. If he doesn't wrestle him, I think he's going to out-volume him and just outwork him. Just be careful and don't be knocked out. If he doesn't get knocked out, Devin Clark wins the fight. So I'm picking Devin Clark to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Lina Lansberg versus Pannie Kianzd. I think it's a good fight for Pannie Kianzd. She's a big favourite on the betting line, and I kind of agree with it. Although, like I said earlier, with Mayra Bueno Silva, it's a little bit sketchy playing those big, chalky favourites in these spots. But it is a fight that I think Pannie Kianzd is going to have success in. Pannie Kianzd, at this point, I think she's the more experienced fighter. Her record's better. She's fought the better level of opponents recently. She's coming off a loss against Raquel Pennington, but it was a close fight. And as we saw last weekend, Raquel Pennington can run through you still at this point. She's a veteran. But Pannie Kianzd went to a really close decision with her. They didn't look a million miles off from who was the more skilled fighter. And I think that just shows how far Pannie Kianzd come and how much she's developed over the last few years. Like I said, at this point, she's had more fights, she's more experienced. And with Lina Lansberg getting up there in age, I think she's going to be 39, 40 when she steps inside the cage. So Pannie Kianzd's younger, I think she's fresher, she's quicker, she's the more clean, crisp striker. Lina Lansberg might try and look for the takedowns here. In fact, I think that's a path to victory. But Pannie Kianzd's got decent wrestling defense. She can get back up to her feet as well if she is taken down. I don't think this fight's going to be won and lost in the wrestling and grappling scenarios. If there is wrestling and grappling scenarios, and like I say, I think Lina Lansberg will be the one creating those opportunities for herself. But like I said, I think that this fight is going to be won and lost with what happens on their feet and who's the more clean, crisp striker, because that's where I see this fight playing out for the prolonged periods of time. And that is just Pannie Kianzd all day for me. I think, like I said, her striking's cleaner. She's got good combinations. She slides in and out of range really well. And I think she's just going to land simply just more volume than Lina Lansberg. And that's going to be the big biggest factor in this fight, because I do think the fight is going to go late. I think it is going to go to a decision, and the judges are going to see that volume upside on Pannie Kianzd. They're going to see some wrestling and grappling from Lina Lansberg, but nothing significant enough to give her the fight. I think Pannie Kianzd will win at least 2 out of the 3 rounds, potentially all 3, with that volume, with that good movement, with the speed. I'm picking Pannie Kianzd to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Drakkar Klose versus Brandon Jenkins. Drakkar Klose is a huge favourite. I think he's a -400 favourite at the time of recording in this fight. And although he definitely should be favoured, I don't think he should be a -400 favourite in this fight. I think it's very, very risky if you are going to play him. He does obviously have some solid advantages, but not -400 advantages. And I don't think he'll look like a -400 favourite in this fight either. Drakkar Klose has got to make sure in this fight that he's not playing out at range with Brandon Jenkins, because although Brandon Jenkins isn't the more experienced fighter, although overall as a mixed martial artist he's not as good of a fighter, he's still got decent striking. He's got a Muay Thai style, coming forwards, throwing low kicks, just landing on his opponent, doesn't overexert himself, he doesn't waste too much energy. And I think from a striking perspective, Drakkar Klose has got to be careful, because he has been hurt in previous fights, he has been outworked in previous fights, but where Drakkar Klose is going to have big advantages here is in that wrestling within the clinch work, and I think that's where he should take this fight, and if he does, then it could look quite clean for him. Again, I don't think he quite covers -400, but Drakkar Klose pinning up against the cage, making fights dirty, ugly, throwing the dirty boxing, doing just enough for the referee not to separate him against the cage, but then looking to wrestle and grapple as well. He's got a decent topside game against a certain level of opponent. Obviously, when he's fighting fighters that are at his level or better, then he is going to struggle in that respect. But right here against Brandon Jenkins, I do think that he's going to have advantages in that wrestling and topside grappling, and that's where the fight is going to look most clean for Drakkar Klose. But out in space, I do think that Drakkar Klose runs the risk of Brandon Jenkins doing some good work. And I'm not saying that Brandon Jenkins is definitely the better striker, and I'm not saying that Brandon Jenkins is going to be lethal on the feet and knock him out, but whilst Drakkar Klose is striking with Jenkins, he just gives Jenkins a chance. He just gives him a chance to get into the fight. So for Drakkar Klose, I do think he is definitely the more experienced fighter. He's definitely fought the better level of competition. And because of that, I do think he's going to have a good game plan in this fight with good fight IQ, and he's going to come in there and he's going to watch what Ronson did to Brandon Jenkins in regards to pushing him back to the cage and rinsing and repeating the takedowns. I think Drakkar Klose could follow that blueprint for sure, and if he does, then like I said, it's going to look like a much cleaner fight for Klose. I do think that the striking is close, but like I said, the big advantages are in the clinch and in the wrestling and topside jiu-jitsu for Drakkar Klose. So for those reasons, I'm picking Drakkar Klose to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Rafa Garcia versus Jesse Ronson. And this is a fight that I think is going to be very close. The betting lines have suggested it's going to be close. You know, it's a dead even pick'em at some bookies, and I understand it. I think that Jesse Ronson's win over Nicholas Dalby was a phenomenal win. It showed that his striking's improved. It showed that he can crack, he can drop his opponent, that he does have good grappling as well, because when Dalby did get dropped, Ronson dropped with him, went on top of him and started looking for submissions and getting good positions over Nicholas Dalby. So that to me just showed that Ronson has got a complete game, and he's come back to the UFC for his second stint, a much more improved fighter, a much more experienced fighter with better fight IQ as well. And then as for Rafa Garcia is a fighter that will be in your face. He's got decent striking. He doesn't overload. He doesn't overexert himself or waste too much energy in regards to the striking. But Rafa Garcia against Natan Levy put on a really good performance, a performance that I didn't think he was able to put on against somebody like Levy. But Garcia's wrestling was on point in that fight. He was shooting good takedowns, and he was getting some decent top control time as well, but not so much top control. And this is where my issue is with Garcia. I think his wrestling is good. I think his striking is good, but where he needs to improve is that top side control, being able to stay on top of his opponents for longer periods of time. If I was confident that his top side grappling was good enough to be able to hold Jesse Ronson down for long periods, then I think Rafa Garcia would be definitely a good bet in this fight. But I'm not convinced that he is going to be able to have that top side control over Ronson. He might be developed from his last fight to this fight during camp, but I think that he is going to score takedowns in this fight. But I think Ronson is going to be able to get back up to his feet. I think Ronson's going to be dangerous on the feet. I think that the volume's going to be very similar. I think they'll both be there, but I do think that Ronson will be the slightly cleaner, crisper striker, not by a great deal. However, I do think that the difference in this fight is going to be the wrestling for Garcia if he does come with that game plan, which I assume he's going to after he had success with it in his last fight. I do think he can rinse and repeat takedowns. I'm not convinced he's going to be able to keep Ronson down for long periods of time, but when there's enough takedowns in a fight, that's normally enough to look dominant in the judges' eyes should it go there, which, like I said, if he isn't keeping Ronson down, it is likely to go to the scorecards. So I think the wrestling of Garcia is going to get him through this fight. With or without top control, I just think there'll be enough of it. I think it could look a lot like the Natan Levy fight, except I do think that Natan Levy's a better wrestler and grappler than what Jesse Ronson is. So for that reason, I think it's going to be slightly easier for Garcia in that wrestling and grappling perspective, but he does have to be careful of the clean, crisp and power behind Jesse Ronson's striking. I think the wrestling's going to get Rafa Garcia over the line. I'm picking Rafa Garcia to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fun one at heavyweight. We've got Huggy Bear back again, Chris Barnett versus the newcomer, the debutant, Martin Buday. And how can you not love Huggy Bear, Chris Barnett, finishing Jean Valente in the way he did with the spin head kick. And he's just a super fun guy. He's short for the weight class, obviously a heavyweight division. But I do like aspects of Chris Barnett's game. I love his low kicks. I love his energy and his movement, especially early in the fight. If things aren't going his way, though, the one red flag is that he can tire out, he can be got at, he can be hit, he starts turning his back and, running away, and just the things that you really don't want to see. But outside of that, like I said, good low kicks, he sticks with a good jab, he'll come in, throw a good combination, and slide right back out of range. But I think Martin Buday is not a guy that you really want to be messing with and playing with your food with in this position. I think Buday's striking's decent. He's got power behind him as well. And when Buday does come forward, gets a hold of his opponent, pushes the back to the cage, and he starts landing shots inside the clinch, he can land nasty shots that cut you up, that hurt you. But then if you go back and watch his fights regionally, obviously outside of the Contender Series, you'll notice that Buday's got decent wrestling. He'll shoot double legs off the cage, he'll get on top of his opponents where he'll lay heavy. His jiu-jitsu, he's not a phenom, but he does have heavy topside pressure. He's a big guy, and when he's on top of you, it's very difficult to get him off of you. So I think he's got advantages in this fight physically. I think he's got power advantages. I think that he could potentially hurt Huggy Bear on the feet with his strikes. I think he could get a hold of Huggy Bear against the cage and land some nasty strikes in the close clinch quarters. And I also think he'll be able to take Huggy Bear down and land good takedowns, get on top of him, have some topside pressure, topside control time, run the clock down, again land strikes. I think that Buday's got a really good fight ahead of him. I do really like the low kicks of Chris Barnett. I do think that's a massive weapon for him, and if he can try and break Buday down early in this fight, it'll give him a better opportunity moving forwards. But other than that, I think Buday is the more dangerous fighter, the bigger physical presence, and the fighter that could win via striking and wrestling and grappling as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Martin Buday to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got newcomer Trey Ogden versus Jordan Leavitt. And this is going to be a really interesting fight from a grappling perspective, because Leavitt, as we know, is a very tricky grappler to deal with. He does have red flags on him, though. If things don't go his way, he can look to slow down, mentally break a little bit. He can tire as well with his cardio and just look a little bit lost inside the cage. But he does have a good first round, for a good first 7.5 minutes, and he is dangerous on the mat. And this is where it becomes a little bit interesting, because Trey Ogden is a wrestler and grappler. He does prefer to get fights down to the mat when you watch his fights. Obviously outside of the UFC, this is his debut. So taking this fight down to the mat is going to give Jordan Leavitt opportunities. And the big concern I've got with Trey Ogden is he has been submitted a few times before. He has been guillotined twice by Thomas Gifford. You'll remember him from the UFC, obviously no longer with the UFC. So that's a concern, the fact that he has got takedowns before and a good grappler, and being caught in a submission twice by the same guy, which is a surprise. But outside of that, he has got good top control time when he can get his opponent settled. He is definitely more aware of what's going on. I think it's that initial takedown with the initial scramble and the initial submission attempt that he gets stuck with. But then on the feet, I think he's a much better striker than Jordan Leavitt. He fights longer. He's got good, clean, crisp technique. He'll fire to the legs, to the body, to the head. He'll mix in kicks as well. So I think he's got huge advantages over Jordan Leavitt on the feet. So I actually think that Trey Ogden could come into this fight with a striking game plan, even though he's a wrestler and a grappler, and have the onus on Jordan Leavitt to be the one that needs to get the fight down to the mat. And Ogden can just use his skills from a defensive perspective to try and keep the fight upright. But if Ogden does be the aggressor with the wrestling and grappling, there is obviously the worry that he gets submitted in a scramble, but he's a bigger physical presence inside the cage. So once he does if he does settle Jordan Leavitt on the mat, then I think he's got advantages there. So I think Trey Ogden's got a good fight ahead of him, and I think his cardio will hold up much better as well. I think he's going to be the better striker. I think once settled on the mat, I think he's going to be the better grappler. I think he's the better wrestler as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Trey Ogden to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Sam Hughes versus Estela Nunes. I think it's a fight that's going to be won and lost on the feet. Neither fighter really love to engage in the wrestling and grappling. I think they're both going to get a fight that they want here. Both are probably sick of fighters trying to take them down and get the better of them on the mat with the wrestling and grappling. And I just feel that Nunes is the cleaner striker here. I think she's the more varied striker. She's got a Muay Thai style, and she will throw to the legs, to the body, to the head. She'll mix things up with her kicks and her punches as well. Again, I don't think she's a striking phenom or a striker that will put that much pressure on Sam Hughes. I think Sam Hughes will actually be the aggressor in this fight more often than not coming forwards. But I think Nunes' technical ability and her technical striking is cleaner, crisper. I think there's more volume there as well. If there is a finishing upside, I think it's Sam Hughes, with her being overly aggressive, and you know, she's a boxing heavy type of striker. So I think if there is a finishing upside, it probably does go to Sam Hughes, but I'd be shocked if there was a big knockout in this fight. I think it's a fight that is very likely going to go to a decision, and from that opinion of where the fight's going to go, like I said, I think Estela Nunes is just going to be able to piece Sam Hughes up, land volume, vary the attacks up and down the body, and just look like a really good fighter in this spot. I think it's a really good spot for Estela Nunes to establish herself in the UFC and show the world her skills, her abilities, and look to progress further and come back from that loss that she suffered in the UFC debut last time out. So I'm picking Estela Nunes to win this fight. And in the final fight of this breakdown, we've got Alateng Lee versus Kevin Croom. And I think this is actually going to be a really fun fight. Kevin Croom's a dog fighter, will come forward at all times, elite shots if it means landing a few himself. He'll look to try and make the fight dirty, ugly, gritty against the cage inside with dirty boxing, landing strikes inside of boxing range as well. He doesn't really like to sit on the outside too much, and he will look for takedowns. He will try and get the fight down to the mat, and like I say, just look to make fights dirty, ugly, high pace, high pressure, aggression. But unfortunately for Kevin Croom, that actually works against him, because he does tire late in fights. We have seen him start really fast and not be able to get his opponent out, and then come a little bit unstuck, and then, like I say, the gas tank's emptied, and then the problems start coming in regards to his movement and getting his head off the centre line, and he becomes hittable. And I think Alateng Lee's got a good fight ahead of him here. I think that he's going to have to weather a storm from Kevin Croom, who will come forwards. I think Alateng Lee will have to be defensive in the early moments in this fight, but Alateng Lee's got decent boxing. Again, calm, clean, composed. He's durable as well, which we've definitely seen why in the past. Go back and, you know, watch his previous fights. But he's durable, he's clean, he's crisp with his boxing, but he's also a good wrestler as well, and we don't see that as often as we should from Alateng Lee, but I think we will in this fight. If Kevin Croom does start to slow and tire, I think we'll see Alateng Lee look for those takedowns, get topside control, and if Kevin Croom is tired and if he has been worn a little bit throughout the fight, I think Alateng Lee is going to have a lot of success in that grappling and topside positions. So I think that, like I said, Alateng Lee is going to have to weather a storm here for sure, but I think he will weather the storm. I don't think Kevin Croom puts him out, and I think Alateng Lee builds into the fight. The longer the fight goes on, he's going to look better and better. His boxing's going to look cleaner and crisper the longer the fight goes on. He's going to be able to get his wrestling going as well, and those two aspects should be enough for him to take this fight, either fighting a late finish, or if it does go to the scorecards, just win the latter parts of the fight, take round 2 and 3, and win comfortably at least 29-28. Again, should it go to the scorecards, I'm picking Alateng Lee to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of On the Moneyline. As always, I appreciate all the support, guys. I'll always try and get back to you in the comments as well. If you've got any thoughts and opinions, tell me your bets in the comments and I'll reply. We'll try and get a conversation going. Please like the video, subscribe to the MMA Play 365 YouTube channel as well. Again, it's always appreciated. Thank you for listening. I'm Newsome. We'll see you next week.